to turn the floor over to Ann Newton from Captain Associates just to make a couple comments.
Hey, everybody. I just want to apologize for the technical difficulties that cut last week's meeting short. Your time is valuable, and we recognize how frustrating it was to not have the meeting go as planned. Our team has done everything in our power to ensure we won't encounter the same issue again. So again, our apologies for last week, and we look forward to a productive meeting this evening.
Thank you, Ann. So I would like to start with a roll call, and Christina Vega, if you could do a quick roll call, and when your name is called, if you could just, as a CAG member, unmute and just say here or present, whatever you'd like to do. So Christina.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Andrew Crow. Are they able to unmute?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So Andrew's not on yet, looks like. So.
Okay, I'll come back to that, Andrew. Brian Allen?
I'm here, but there's only 4 of us from the CAG on this call.
I see a few more.
Well, I see 5 now.
Do I have Dr. Bruce Hector? Chad Cheung? Craig Galante?
Yes, I'm here.
Do I have Don Dwiggins? Jeff Hammond?
Here.
Lori Ivazon?
Yes, I'm here.
Mary Blair?
I'm here.
Thank you. Miran? I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name. Dijon?
I don't see Miran yet.
Mike Benedetto? And Patty Glick.
I'm here.
And you skipped Melissa Messer.
Melissa Messer? Okay, I got her. Thank you.
Melissa's here.
Sorry
so
about that,
for any CAG members that join late, Christina will be watching as people sign on, so we'll make sure we document that. So again, just a reminder, we do have a tight agenda. It is a continuation of last week's agenda. We are going to start with a little bit with Assistant Chief Flores answering some questions and doing a little bit of a recap from last week. We'll have opening comments from the CAG, followed by a discussion on the health study goals and priorities document and environmental data, and then a discussion about the budget summary as well, with some closing comments by Dr. Davis and then public comment as well. As a reminder, if you could just keep your phone or your sound silenced when you're not speaking, that would be helpful. And for public, we will definitely have the public comment at the latter part of the meeting. And so we welcome you until that time to go ahead and post comments or discussion into the chat. We do want to make sure that we stay on our agenda, so I will be watching time pretty closely and trying to enforce the times on the agenda to make sure that we cover everything. And also just a note on just setting up some additional ground rules for this evening. We want to make sure that everyone is respectful of one another and that we're not talking over each other. So just one person at a time, please. And we will be using the mute button if we need to, just to make sure that people aren't talking over one another and that there's no foul language or anything of that sort for this night's meeting. We really want to make sure that's a very productive and informative meeting for everyone involved. Brian, if you have something very quick, that would be great, because we definitely want to make sure that we get enough of Assistant Chief Flores.
Yes, it's very quick. Since this is a CAG meeting, or at least it's identified as a CAG meeting, I think it would be appropriate to identify the people that are on this meeting so that the CAG knows who they're talking to.
And do you mean by staff from DPH and others on the call? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, I'm not too concerned about the public. They're entitled, but I think anybody that is invited by DPH outside the CAG should be identified to the CAG so the CAG knows who they're talking to.
Sure, and normally we have those we're on the nameplate, so we'll start making those changes to the names to make sure that everyone's identified. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to turn it over to Assistant Chief Flores. That was the agenda item we left on the other evening and got a little cut short there. So we want to give you the floor to make a few comments and then be able to answer some questions as well.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to give you guys an update on the CB3 gas emission. So I gave a short briefing last week, but due to technical difficulties, we cut it short. And I know some of you guys, probably half the group here wasn't able to hear it. But so I'm going to give you guys, go back again and give you guys another brief. So last time we gave you guys an update on this scenario, that was about a year and 2 months ago. That was back in July 31st of last year. At that time, SoCalGas was still doing the hydro excavating. They were still collecting the gas samples, and they were working on their final report. 2 months later, on September 21st, SoCalGas submitted their final report. It was a 950-page report. It was so large that they couldn't even email it to us, so we were able to get it through one device, which is basically downloaded from their network. We held several meetings with SoCalGas, the agency group. We asked them several questions based on our review of the report. SoCalGas submitted 2 supplemental reports in the months after. At the same time, CalGEM, they allocated some funding and they sent that final report to the national laboratories. The national laboratories is an independent third group laboratory. They are renowned experts in the type of field of soil geology, hydro excavation, and energy. A lot of NASA and the government agencies work with this group. So the national laboratories, they reviewed the 950-page report, and 2 months later, they submitted basically their findings. They seem to agree with SoCalGas's conclusions that the low-level emission was not coming from their storage gas. It was all based on the isotopic analysis and all the sampling that they did. However, though, the national lab did recommend further testing at different depths in the field, they just specific testing at specific areas near the CP3 area. SoCalGas did do those additional testings, and they submitted those report findings to the group. At this time, the national lab is further reviewing all the 2 supplemental reports and that additional report that SoCalGas submitted. So that's basically what right now we're in a holding pattern, waiting for the national labs. Our agency, Health Hazmat Division, we continue doing our air monitoring every 2 weeks at Porter Ranch. We first enter the facility, we go around the CB3 area, and then we do perimeter readings along Cessnon and Tampa Avenue and Circle Springs Road. So we continue doing that every 2 weeks. To date, we have not, with our handheld meters and also our noses, which works as a great instrument, we have not smelled any odors at the perimeter coming out from the facility. And also, to date, we have not gotten any readings for volatile organic compounds emitting from the facility, and that's at the fence line. So that's as far as with the report. I did get everyone's questions from last week. They were submitted through public health, and I will answer some of the questions. So one of the questions was about the final report to see if County Fire is able to give it to you guys directly to the CAG. The answer is yes. So I can coordinate with someone from the CAG. I can meet you guys at our district office in Sylmar. If you guys can bring along either a laptop or a flash drive, and I'll be glad to give you that 950-page report. Again, it's something that is so large that I cannot email it to anyone. It just, our email capabilities doesn't exceed that. So I'm willing to meet you guys again at the Sylmar office, and we can discuss that later. I can get linked to public health, and I'll be able to share that report. Another question that someone posed was regarding the waste bins that were in place since 2016. I guess the question was, does County Fire have any of the data, any of the analysis from those 180 bins? The answer is yes. Back last year in August 12th of 2020, that was last year, the Board of Supervisors sent an email to the different agencies informing everyone, inquiring if anyone had any information regarding the bins that were on site. These were the bins that were collected, all the waste streams that were collected from the 2016 blowout. We reached out to SoCal Gas, and also we coordinated with Public Health. We obtained the analyticals of 150 bins that still remain there last year. So we obtained all the analytical data, lab reports, lab analysis from SoCal Gas on August 19th. We do have that information. And there were an additional 31 bins that we also had, obtained manifest receipts. So during the time in 2016, again, we went back and forth with SoCal Gas, and we determined that in 2016, 31 bins were removed under waste manifest. So we do have those records for the 31, which were manifested out back in 2016. And then we do have the analyticals for the 150 that were present in 2020 last year. And then since then they have been removed. So I do have that information. Again, I can share that with the CAG, all that data with you guys. Third,
just a quick note too that thank you for offering to have people come down to the office. DPH also did post a link to the report on the study website. So if somebody wanted to view it or download it from there, I believe that's available now as well.
Okay, so that's even better, Susan. So that's a better way to do that, because otherwise you would have to bring a flash drive. So thank you for that update. So again, addressing the bins, we do county fire health hazmat, we do have the analyticals in the waste manifest. And back last year in August, September, we did share that information with Public Health. I believe Katie Butler, which I believe she's no longer with Public Health, but again, I know she was part of the health study that was working with the CAG and you guys, but that information was shared back in August and September. Another question that the CAG posed was I guess they were people in the community, when the fire occurred back in 2019, they saw some type of gas or some type of flames in the storm drains along Rinaldi Boulevard. So again, the fire occurred on October 11th. We became aware of it on October 16th. So that was 5 days later into the fire. Public Health reached out to us and they said if we had heard anything regarding any flames in the gases. Again, I did my research this past week and we did go out on October 16th. We do have documentation that we send a team out to Rinaldi and Corbin all along that intersection there. That was in front of the B of A. They spoke with B of A staff and they basically walked around that intersection at all four corners and all along Rinaldi and up Corbin. We took measurements with our instrumentation and we did not, again, this is 5 days later on the 16th. We did not get any readings, however. Again, I hate to say that, but it's again, 5 days later, we did not get any readings for VOCs or LELs, just to show that there's some type of gases in the storm drains, in the sewers there and that intersection. So that's the best I could do as far as that research. That was pretty much the questions that I received. They were just, they're written in different form, but those were the questions. So if there's any questions, please, I'll be glad to answer some of your questions.
Thanks so much. Are there any additional questions from members of the CAG? Patty, go ahead and unmute.
Yes. Okay. So about the 31 bins, I heard just about the manifest, which we got a chance to look at, but so there's no chance of getting any of the data that was taken about those bins that identified that they had VOCs, because those bins went through our neighborhoods, and that's a big concern of ours.
Okay, yeah. So back in October again in August of last year, when we were, when we first became aware of those bins or any of the bins that were out there, we did not ask for the analyticals. Our main thing was to make sure that the bins got to a proper destination, which is, it has to be, a proper TSDF facility, et cetera. So at that time, we just homed in on, on the manifest. The manifest, it's a record that goes from cradle to grave. It's signed by SoCal Gas staff, and it makes its way through the transporter all the way to its ultimate destination. So at that point, our our more importance there was just track down these manifests, which were provided. We did not request for the analysis or from analyticals from that. That's something we can track down. We can do that. I don't see why not, and I can request Soco Gas, and I'll track that down. So I'll make a note of that to request the analyticals if they have that. But please, at the time, we just thought 30 went missing, right? Because I believe that was the allegation, like what 30 went missing. So we homed in on the manifest. So that was the reason why, Patty.
Yeah, that would be great, because again, we're very concerned about those 31 missing bins
Sure.
and what was exactly in them.
No problem. Back in August, as soon as we heard that, we did send an inspector out. We observed the 150 bins. We'd issued a notice of violation because some of the labeling, as you can imagine, from 2016, 4 years later, some of the labels were already, unreadable, damaged. Due to rains also, 3 years later, some of the bins were rusted. We did not see any spills. We have cameras. We would have taken, but nothing was spilled. But nonetheless, we issued a notice of violation. They did change out the bins under our watch, and they provided that information. So we did go out there to observe the 150 bins.
Okay, and we'll take one more question. I know we have Christina Vakulik will be talking about some of the environmental data a little bit later as well. So there'll be more opportunity to talk about that. But go ahead, Craig, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Chief Flores, for being here again tonight. A couple questions. National labs, who hired them and who pays for them? And I have two more quick follow-ups.
Sure. So CalGEM was the one that allocated funding because they're not cheap. I asked here, the national laboratories, again, they're independent groups. I believe CalGEM sent it to their San Francisco office. So again, the answer is CalGEM paid for that.
Were there any audits done of what SoCalGas did to mitigate the fugitive flame? In other words, they did the investigation on site. Was there any audits done to validate what their findings were? And then finally, you talked about taking measurements, at fence line you do on every 2 weeks. What about measurements in the field? What about measurements at the fire site or elsewhere within the Aliso storage facility?
Right. Okay. So again, we're dealing with the CB3 area. Okay, the area where the gas is emitting, it's called the CB3 area, and we absolutely go. That's the first thing we do. We go into the facility. It's literally in the middle of a hill where it's coming out from. So we go on top of the hill. Above, we take measurements. Down below, we have a temperature gun. Also, we pointed at the source area, which is, I would say, 30 yards away from where we can stand. Due to the rains from last year, it's just it's impossible to kind of hike up there. Initially, from when we discovered this, Soco Gas did they made some steps. They carved out some steps for the teams and the contractors to climb up there, but everything was eroded with the rains last season. So all we could do is just around right at the area where the gas is emitting.
Thank you.
Any audits of SoCalGas's claims or how they've tried? They didn't mitigate the fugitive emissions. They're still coming out from the ground. They didn't find the source, so they couldn't stop it. Is that correct?
That is correct. Okay, so I think what I mentioned last time again was that based on Soco Gas, they hire Geocentric, which is, I guess that's their consulting firm. They're the ones that come to publish and they collect all the data. So they concluded that basically that the gas, based on all the data, that the gas is not the storage, the storage gases, that that's coming from a shallow gas zone. I think it's like 1,000 feet. Please don't quote me on this, Craig. And then, again, there's three zones: the shallow zone, the plowing zone, and then the storage zone way down. There's three zones out there. So that's, again, the national labs. Again, they are the front runners, renowned specialists in this type of field. CalGEM felt that they, again, just to have a third independent group, review all the isotopic analysis. The isotopic analysis was done by a third laboratory in Chicago. Again, there are few laboratories in the country that can do isotopic analysis. And in isotopic analysis, basically, you're looking at what the carbon chains are in a gas. And again, I'm no expert by no means, but so they just start comparing the storage gas with all the samples that were collected in the different zones, and that's how they're able to interpret the data.
Thank you. Thanks. So I do encourage anyone who has continued questions, if you could paste them into the chat, and we'll do our best to maybe respond to those in real time if Assistant Chief Fernando Flores can do so. Otherwise, we will try to keep track of those questions as well, and maybe even have an opportunity later to answer some of those too.
Sure. So I could say, Susan, at 6:30, I do have to leave.
Perfect. Okay.
I'm dealing with another incident in LA County, but if you guys can submit the questions to me like you guys did, I'd be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you. And we'll make sure those get posted or as part of the notes as well. So thank you very much. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the CAG for a 5 to 10 minute presentation of some opening comments. We have those slides loaded up. So I believe Sharon will be sharing the slides, and Craig, will you be delivering the presentation for the CAG?
Yes, I will. And do you have my slides that I sent over this afternoon?
Yes, we do. We have the most recent version. So Sharon's going to post those up right now. And hopefully everyone did see the link to the agenda in the chat if you would like to pull that up at any point as well. So thanks so much, Chief Flores, and we'll definitely send you additional questions as they come throughout the evening, and invite you to stay on for the next 5 or 10 minutes as well. Right?
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I appreciate the time to give the community an update and also share the CAG's opinions and where we are at the moment based upon being together for nearly over 2 years. So it's important. It's been a long time. We should quickly reiterate what we're dealing with here. 118 days of unabated exposure. It's the largest methane and polytoxin release in U.S. history, and obviously over the greatest number of people. And for volume's sake, so no one loses context here, it was 200 times greater in volume than Deepwater Horizon, the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Something like 83 homes and families were relocated for 6 to 7 months, and approximately 1.2 million residents were impacted in the North San Fernando Valley. Go ahead. So as we all know, and why we kind of are all here, there was a $25 million settlement with SoCalGas set aside to do a health study. And LA Department of Public Health is to administer or be the curator of those funds and guide this study on behalf of the community. And there's 2 groups we talk about a lot, the SOC, Scientific Oversight Committee, and tonight's Community Advisory Group. It's important to note that the CAG met for the first time 25 months ago. I think if you counted tonight, it would be 26 months ago. So it was like August of 2019. So go ahead. And an article was published in yesterday's Los Angeles Times, and it made the front page. And I think this quote from a Porter Ranch resident is critically important that we all take a pause and read it, and I'll read it to you, because this is why we are together. So I redacted the woman's name because I don't know her. She's in the Times. It's listed at the bottom. Anybody can go look. But I just didn't think it was fair to her to put her name and her family's name here. But it's available. It's in the newspaper. So the leak forced Ms. R, okay, her husband, and her 1- and 3-year-old sons to flee their dream home in Porter Ranch and move to a cramped apartment in Westwood. They were one of the families that left the area. Then it gets really sad. Her husband was diagnosed with testicular cancer in the months after the blowout, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019 and undergoing a double mastectomy. Go ahead. She went on to further say that she hopes that the health study will identify the harms of exposure and allow doctors to advise families on preventative care. She's being very humble. She's being very generous to people around her. Her family has suffered greatly. And then this quote gave me pause, and I hope it gives everyone in this meeting pause as well. She's asking, are my kids going to get cancer? Am I going to be alive to see them through it? She said, it is not for our generation. It's going to help for generations ahead. So if this doesn't resonate with everybody in this meeting, you are not paying attention. And to help Mrs. R and thousands more like her. The CAG and the community have been very clear on what they medically need and want in this health study. Go ahead. Wow. Okay, I'm going to share screens. So Susan, I mean, this isn't even legible. So please share screens, and I'll go to this slide.
So these were added about a half hour ago. When you sent
I have the
them.
same slides, so we can go ahead and let's share. Host has disabled participant screen share. Could you please enable it?
You can also share from the PDF that was sent over, Sharon, if sometimes you can't enable something.
It's the same one. If you guys just let me share, it's already queued up. There we go.
Correct. I just gave you co-host ability, so you should
Thank
be able
you.
to share screen now.
Very generous. Let me get right to it so we can get to our conversation and our meeting. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So we've been very clear on what we want, and we've been so clear, and yet but it wasn't recognized that we began charting what our requests were, and they're listed here. And these are core elements that are fundamentally required. And you all have seen this slide before. And again, it was intended to keep track of things so we knew where the priorities were so that we could move to action. It wasn't meant to be punitive, but one has to wonder, why are these things so many on this list? When we've been very clear what this community wants, and here we are, on average, 20 months in arrears, 20 months. The air monitoring, not in DPH's jurisdiction, we get that. The ones with the asterisks are in your bailiwick, the chemical list, the CBC study. I mean, we're waiting for the CBC study for 22 months, 22 months. Fugitive emissions, what we mean by that is we know there are existing fugitive emissions, and it hasn't been fully recognized by public health and a deep investigation into what is continuing to harm us. The cancer registry study has been stalled for over 17 months. We've made it very clear what we want. A video presentation that was to represent to the researchers, to the future researchers, put a face and names and context to the people they're doing the research for. That never materialized. Now, Dr. Davis, in our last CAG meeting, 3 months ago, got rather defensive and said that he felt his team was doing everything that they can, and he was sort of, defending the group. I have to submit to everyone watching this, including the leadership and those involved at DPH, under no circumstances in any environment I have ever been, and I've been in some very high-performing environments and some, mediocre ones. None of them would accept a 20-month delay on this many critical path topics. No one. So to say you're doing a good job, I really, we would have to disagree and beg for you to reset your bar on what acceptable is. Our top concerns, and we just limited it to one page. There's many more, but the top concerns are DPH's refusal to subpoena the SoCal Gas for the comprehensive list of our exposures. That the monitoring, the air monitoring, CCST, the think tank that Sacramento goes to, has already told you that the monitoring that was done is insufficient and incapable of doing proper health assessment risks. No monitoring was done during the heaviest toxin weeks. And actually, Christina V was rather dismissive about that in our last meeting. She says, oh, well, there was only a few days missing. It's not that big of a deal. We completely beg to differ. And if you want to be science-based, you have to recognize that the CCST acknowledged that that was perhaps the worst of the worst that was admitted in the beginning days. Here's another big one that we don't talk about much. Only 21 of the known hazardous chemicals were monitored by the air monitoring, or 37%. So there's this whole soup of other chemicals that are known to be dangerous that weren't even monitored at all. Benzene. That SoCal Gas was in charge of the monitoring for a lot of these stations, not all of them, but a lot of them. And the data being used to evaluate what we were exposed to was using trigger devices, right? Once it gets to a certain level, it sets the trigger, does an air grab sample, and it goes off for assay. Those monitors, the benzene level was set at 20 times higher than what Cal EPA says is safe. So the benzene could have been all day, 4 days, 4 weeks at 15, 18, 10 times higher than what is okay by Cal EPA, and the monitor never evaluated it. The air monitoring is garbage and has been acknowledged by a highly respected think tank based in hired by Sacramento.
Just a quick time check, Craig, you're at 8 minutes.
Okay, well, we said 10, so we're going to go probably going to go 11, maybe 12. So I'm trying to go, Susan, but this is really critically important. So there's also a failure to investigate the ongoing exposures. There's the fugitive emissions of the fires. Thank you, Chief, for briefing us, but there's still a ton of open questions. And so that everyone else is aware, DPH's own wind study, the GIS-HEAL study that they commissioned, found while the field was dormant that there was fugitive emissions. And they said in their report 4 years ago, 5 years ago, probably now, 4 years ago for sure, that fugitive investigations are necessary. None of those have happened. And the radiation discovery. You've poked around up in the field, but you haven't done it in the community. Next slide, please. Well, I guess that's me. So the biggest concern we have is we still do not know what we were exposed to. How can you do a study if you don't know what you're exposed to? Also, in that same article that the mom was talking about the health of her children, Michael Jarrett, a professor at UCLA, who's very well known in this area, made some observations about what's going on. And he said, and this has been corroborated by others, there really isn't great scientific literature on what the length of exposures can mean for the formation of long-term health effects. In short, there's not a lot of literature or very little literature on if you get exposed to a polytoxin of benzene, acrolein, and formaldehyde. There is no literature to say to physicians, if they're exposed to this is what to expect. He went on to also say, and this is critically important, that going back now and reconstructing the exposure is really complicated and an uncertain task. Now, he is known in the industry as a major thought leader. And he is saying going back and trying to recreate is not a certain task to understand what's going on. Therefore, if you can't rely on the air monitoring, if you can't rely on the science of what these polytoxins mean because the literature doesn't exist, you can't go back. And I like what Andrew once said. Nobody in this community asked for an environmental health assessment. That's never what this community asked for. What we've been asking for and demanding, and it only seems logical because you can't backfill what happened 6 years ago, is to look at the people today. It is necessary to do a scientific analysis of the synergistic health effects of the polytoxins. There's no other logical path to get a true answer. Yet, the current goals and priorities do not require a clinical evaluation. And this has been deemed not acceptable to every thought leader in the community, including rejected unanimously by the CAG. All the adjacent NCs voted on it and rejected it. It was also rejected in writing by some 400 community members. And I want to get into a debate about what DPH is considering responses from the community and what they're not, because we think you're shortchanging those 400 written, even if they were redundant. Okay, there was thought leaders that put that out there, and over 400 people agreed with it and said this is wrong. Just because they use the same language does not mean you can dismiss it.
So Craig, just to note
Almost
that.
done, Susan. Almost done. So to sum it up, there's a lot of noise in the background. That would be great. Not only did DPH ignore the CAG's advice for 25 months, but DPH also refused to revise the study's goals and priorities to represent the overwhelming demands of this harmed community. Fact. So what does this leave us? This leaves us with a community that is in deep lack of trust and lack of confidence in the path that DPH is on. We've seen this slide before. I'm not going to bother to explain it. It's all there. So where are we? Clinical evaluations are not an option. Without a study based on the clinical evaluations that we've been preaching since day one, with knowledge of all exposures, there's only one path for the CAG and the community to conclude. That DPH and the SOC are on a path that is not science-based, but politically driven. We also will move forward with there's intentional intent to whitewash the short and long-term health impacts of this worst methane disaster in US history. And it can only be logically explained when you think about it, that it's orchestrated by a politically captured DPH in direct conflict with their mission statement. Again, think of that mom. She is leaving her home in the middle of the biggest blowout in US history, panicked, scared, a 1-year-old on her hip, and a 3-year-old she's clenching by the hand as she races to get in her car to get the heck out of town. And what she wants to know is, will this health study identify the harms of the exposure and allow doctors to advise families so they don't have to suffer like she and her husband did? That's why we're here. Please,
Thanks, Craig.
noise in the background.
So given that the bulk of the agenda is intended to address a lot of those comments, we really need to move into those agenda items to allow for ample time.
So please mute that noise in the background. I know you guys have control. Thank you. So who's responsible for delivering this? It's not the CAG. The CAG has laid it at your doorstep. So who is responsible? And let's put names to this now. We're no longer going to say DPH. We're going to say Catherine, Barbara, Muntu, Paul, and Charlene. We're going to put names to those that are responsible for delivering this, because the CAG and the community have done their job. If you want to move forward, these are the next steps. And we're here to listen tonight. We've told you, we're giving you a chance to show us you've changed your path. Next steps require the subpoena. The goals and priorities document gets revised and more in tune with the feedback you've gotten from the community. Last slide, everybody. Full transparency of the CBC study methodology, data sets, and findings, which was discussed from day one, and Paul Simon knows it. Full transparency to the RFP. We understand it needs to be under confidentiality, but we need witnesses from the CAG on the RFP and researchers selection process. And finally, a resident brought this up 2 years ago. Where's your financial tracking of this? The ball is completely in Barbara's, Catherine's, Muntu's, Paul's, and Charlene's lab. We have done our job. It's up to you now, and we're here to listen tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Craig, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and have Sharon, if you could stop sharing. Sharon put up the slides. Christina has some information to share. So she's got about a 10-minute set of slides to go through a discussion or some information for everyone on the goals and priorities document, along with the environmental data report and some reports. So please bear with us as we have Christina go through this presentation. And when she is done with that, we'll open it up for some Q&A. We are quite a bit behind schedule right now, so I'm going to just let Christina get right into it.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So like Susan said, I'm going to go through the goals and priorities item on our agenda and also the environmental data. So I'll start with the goals and priorities. So over the past several years, public health has been engaging the impacted communities, learning about how you have all been impacted. And again, even today, we learn from you guys. So thank you for sharing, Craig, those stories and the article. It's really important for us to hear. And we've been soliciting input on community concerns and hopes for the upcoming study. So through various engagements and community touch points, which do include community meetings, discussions, town halls, today's meeting even, and opinion surveys, a wealth of input has been received and carefully reviewed and considered by the Scientific Oversight Committee when developing draft goals and priorities for the health study. So The purpose of the goals and priorities were to outline the goals that the health study research must achieve, in addition to priority areas of concern, including health outcomes, identified by impacted community members and as determined by the SOC. Priority areas of concern and interest include health outcomes, population groups that have been impacted, chemical exposures and disaster-related stressors, and data sources. So again, just providing a little bit of background here, there was a comment period on the draft goals and priorities. They were posted on the health study website for about a 6-week comment period. The purpose of posting the draft goals and priorities on the website was to solicit further feedback from the impacted community on what matters most to them in terms of what they feel this health study should achieve and what it should focus on and study. Additionally, the feedback has guided the SOC in their development of final goals and priorities that are being reflected throughout the RFP that will be released this fall. So community feedback was solicited in several ways. One way was using a Google form, and this consisted of 14 closed-ended questions and 10 open-ended questions. And then another way that we received feedback was through email. So respondents could submit their comments directly to us through the ELISA study email address. So what you see now is the 2 different ways that we receive responses. If we look at the Google form, we received 259 unique responses with original narratives. Most of the respondents indicated that they were from Porter Ranch. Actually, 63% indicated that. Additionally, the majority of respondents, 76% of the Google form respondents, replied that the draft goals and priorities mostly or somewhat represented what they hoped the health study would focus on and prioritize. Over email, we received 412 identical form letters and 17 unique emails. The majority of these respondents, or 69%, indicated that they were from outside of the LA County. The form letter included several demands, including specific methods for conducting the research. So next slide. The full results and main themes of the comments received during this public comment period are detailed in the public feedback report, which is available on the Health Study website. We encourage you to take a look. Just want to thank all the respondents who provided their comments, and we thank you for the time that you took to put those together and to submit your thoughtful comments in response to the draft goals and priorities. All of the responses in full have been provided to the Scientific Oversight Committee and have been carefully considered by them. In this report, this input is informing the SOC on their decision for the final goals and priorities, which are being reflected throughout the RFP and will be made available once the RFP is released. Again, we anticipate that the RFP will release in the fall. However, an official release date has not yet been determined. So we want to acknowledge the concern that has been expressed by the community advisory group, acknowledging their requests about specific research methods, particularly the clinical examinations and monitoring. We would like to reassure you that this request has been heard and it is being considered by the SOC. However, we also wanted to clarify the purpose for the health study goals and priorities. So again, the purpose was to outline the goals that the research must achieve, and then it was also to guide the researchers towards questions to be studied by outlining priority areas of concern and interest identified by impacted communities and as determined by the Scientific Oversight Committee. In other words, the priorities are meant to identify what the researchers may study, including potential health outcomes and quality of life impacts from the chemical exposures and disaster-related stressors. Also, vulnerable groups of people who are impacted by this disaster, for example, pregnant persons and people with pre-existing conditions. And as well, the purpose was to gather feedback on potential sources of data, for example, medical records, regulatory agencies, population surveys, et cetera. So the goals and priorities, just to clarify, are not the request for proposal. However, they will be reflected throughout the request for proposal. The purpose is not to identify how the goals of the health study will be achieved or how the priority areas of concern and interest will be studied. In other words, the purpose of the goals and priorities for the health study were not to outline research methods. As part of the request for proposal process, scientific experts and research teams will propose their best and brightest ideas in terms of research methods and specific study designs. For example, in other words, they will outline how they plan to achieve the goals of the health study and address the priorities. The review process that we've put in place is intended to select the proposal that is scientifically robust and best able to address the community-informed goals and priorities for the health study. Go back the other slide, Diane. As mandated by the settlement agreement with the Southern California Gas Company, a team of third-party researchers will be brought on board to conduct the research, and their research will be guided by the Scientific Oversight Committee. This competitive RFP process discussed will support a robust, high quality, and scientifically robust research because scientific experts themselves are going to identify and propose the best possible methods to study the exposures and potential health effects in the impacted communities. To sum up, the goals and priorities are the channel or strategy for the community to inform what will be studied, and the RFP is the vehicle or process for the scientific experts to identify or propose how the research will be conducted. So now you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Additionally, we understand that you have many concerns about your health and your family's health in the impacted communities, and many unanswered questions about how your health and your community's health may have been impacted as a result of this disaster. We have received several communications from the community advisory group members expressing the desire for a health study that addresses the community's medical needs. We wanted to clarify that the $25 million in settlement money was specifically allocated to fund a health study. The consent decree did not specify that the dollars will be used to specifically address medical needs. Therefore, we wanted to take this time to provide a little bit of context and information on what a population health study is generally and what it may be able to accomplish. So a health study is, to put simply, a scientific inquiry designed to address one or more specific research questions. It may be able to determine potential relationships between exposures and health outcomes. It could investigate how exposures may lead to health outcomes. It can examine health of populations by measuring incidence or the prevalence of health conditions. It can identify one or more groups at increased risk of health outcomes due to specific exposures. So in general, population health studies investigate whether there's a relationship between one or more exposures to one or more outcomes in one or more specific populations. However, the information gained from a health study may be able to help an individual's future medical assessments, among other actions, including but not limited to regulatory action and future response efforts. Next slide, please. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about what a health study is and what it may be able to accomplish, you can refer to the following resources here, which are really good.
Thanks, Chris. And just to keep us on schedule, I'm going to have you go ahead and present to the next topic, just so that we have the full presentation on both of these topics, and then we'll entertain some questions or some comments from the CAG as well. So
for sure.
We'll switch gears a little bit here on two of the top issues for the CAG. We're wanted to share this information tonight.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So next we're on to environmental data. So we wanted to take some time as well during this meeting to discuss the data and information that is available related to the Aliso Canyon blowout and gas storage facility operations. The CAG has been really interested in this topic, so I wanted to spend a little bit more time today going over the information. So during the last community advisory group meeting, I went through a technical summary of the existing data and information that is available currently on the health study website. So today my aim is to provide another higher level overview of the data and information and address any remaining questions that you may have. So, oh, you're on the right side. Okay. So before we get into it, I just wanted to provide some background and context on the data sources. So generally, data and information used for research can originate from many sources or entities. researchers themselves can collect data known as primary data, and data collected by researchers is done in a way that is specific to the purposes and needs of the research project. For example, surveys, participant interviews, evaluations, among other methods. Researchers can also request data from other sources or entities, and this is known as secondary data. So such data can come from regulatory agencies. In this case, it could come from public health, from CARB, from SCMD, et cetera. It can come from healthcare organizations, laboratories, surveillance programs, academic institutions, nonprofits, and social and cultural organizations, among many others. So secondary data is often collected for administrative purposes or also record-keeping purposes, and may or may not be specific to the research needs. For example, one example that's commonly used is health records. So when health records are kept, they usually use an ICD code known as the International Classification of Disease. And often researchers, when using this data, would have to kind of uncode all of these health outcomes or conditions that they're interested in researching when they're using that data. So a wealth of secondary data exists that the researchers for the health study may decide to use for their proposed research. And public health is just one of many sources and entities from whom the researchers can request data from. And if the researchers determine that this data is needed for their specific research. For example, public health can provide population data, which may include but not be limited to the community survey data from the LA County Health Survey or from the CASPER that was conducted shortly after the blowout. They could request the health symptom reports data that we kept following and during the blowout, among other data that we've collected over time. Secondary data related to the Lisa Canyon blowout was also collected for a variety of reasons and purposes by other entities. And this includes measuring the rate of methane release and quantifying total methane release during the blowout. Also for occupational health and safety and waste characterization, among many other reasons for why data would be collected during that time. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the data. So this is just an outline of the various secondary data sources that I'm going to go through. So the two main kind of big picture categories here are secondary data sources related to exposures to potential chemical constituents and substances during the blowout and well control operations. And then the other main bucket here is secondary data sources related to health outcomes. So in the exposures bucket, there's several subcategories I'm going to go through today. Those include chemical constituents and substances in the reservoir gas, including odorants. The second bullet here is chemical constituents and substances in the well control materials. The third is the oily residue. And then there's one slide on other relevant secondary data on potential exposures. Next slide. All right, so first I'm going to start with the secondary data and information related to potential exposures to chemical substances from the Aliso Canyon blowout and facility operations. Next slide. So the first item here is we have samples that were taken directly from the gas storage reservoir following the blowout. So this includes a sample that was taken in March 2017 as part of the root cause analysis of the uncontrolled hydrocarbon release from the Lisa Canyon SS25 well. It also includes samples that were taken in November 2019 as part of the Catch Basin 3 spot fire investigation that Chief Flores just spoke about earlier today. The next item here is, again, more information related to the chemical constituents of the reservoir gas. So this includes near well air samples taken during the blowout, including samples that were taken directly from the wellhead plume. and samples taken above and below mats or demister pads that were installed over the well SS25 in January 2016 to capture liquids carried along with the gas. So several of these items in this category include helium, sulfur, and hydrocarbon analyses of natural gas collected on various different dates, gas analysis reports of gas composition, industrial hygiene air sampling for ambient concentrations of chemicals, including volatile organic chemicals, mercaptans, carbon monoxide, and others. This also includes near well sampling, so samples collected 5 to 10 feet downwind from well SS25 during the actual leak and tested for sulfur compounds, hydrocarbons, and volatile organic compounds. And there's others here. For the interest of time, I won't go into everything. Next slide. Okay, so more data related to chemical constituents of reservoir gas. So following the blowout, measurements were taken near the well and elsewhere in the facility from February 2016 to September 2017 to monitor for potential fugitive emissions. Measurements included instantaneous methane mobile monitoring, methane imaging, source methane, hydrogen sulfide measurements, and grab samples. The data that was collected during this time is on the South Coast Air Quality Management District website. So other information related to the chemical constituents of reservoir gas include continuous fixed site air monitoring conducted by multiple entities during and following the blowout at various locations within the facility and the surrounding communities. So this includes methane monitoring at various community sites from December 2015 to July 2017, near real-time benzene monitoring at multiple community sites from early February to June 2016, and at an additional site from October to July 2016. It includes hydrogen sulfide monitoring, and we also have an inline sampling data upstream and downstream of the storage gas reservoir from 2009 to the present day. So in addition, there's more data related to the chemical constituents of reservoir gas. This includes integrated samples again at fixed sites, fixed site air monitoring conducted by multiple entities during and following the blowout at various locations within the facility and facility's fence line and within the surrounding communities. So this includes samples collected at 3 facility sites, 6 fence line sites, and 3 community sites, and tested for methane, volatile organic chemicals, including BTEX, sulfides, and other compounds from January through to July 2016. Samples collected at 3 community sites and at 1 background site and tested for VOCs and other compounds, and samples collected at 2 community sites and tested for carbonyl compounds in February 2016 before the sealing of the well. Try to go a bit quicker. Again, more data related to chemical constituents of the reservoir gas. So there's other long-term sampling that was conducted by multiple entities during the blowout at various locations within the facility and surrounding communities, including schools. So this includes samples collected from 20 nearby schools and tested for hydrocarbons, sulfur compounds, and volatile organic compounds, including BTEX, from November to December 2015. And that data is available on the Los Angeles Unified School District website. And there's other air sampling here that was conducted related to this category. Next slide. So this is a big one as well. So this, again, more data related to the chemical constituents of reservoir gas. And this category here is short-term sampling and investigations conducted by multiple entities during and following the blowout at various locations within the facility and surrounding communities, including schools. So just to highlight a few here, there were 10-minute samples collected at fixed sites and times at 9 sites within the facility and 11 sites within the surrounding communities and tested for methane, hydrocarbons, volatile organic chemicals, including BTEX, sulfur compounds, and other chemicals from October 2015 to January 2016 in the facility, and from October 2015 to March 2016 in the communities. This also includes real-time air monitoring conducted indoors and outdoors at 20 schools for various compounds from November 2015 to February 2016. And that data is available on the Los Angeles Unified School District website. In addition to that, there's a lot of other short-term sampling and investigations that are not listed here. So this includes grab samples within the community as part of the complaint response activities performed by the South Coast Air Quality Management District from October 2015 to the present day. And samples were tested for volatile organic chemicals, BTEX, and other compounds. It also includes field air monitoring logs within the facility and around well SS25 area. And these field monitoring logs were for explosivity, oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, and other compounds. You see the photo on the right bottom side of the page. So there are mobile surveys, measurements, and to characterize methane concentrations in and around Porter Ranch, including 15 schools and in the Aliso Canyon facility from December 2015 to September 2017. That data is available on the South Coast Air Quality Management District website. And then one more example, Public Health conducted an assessment in March and April 2016, and this consisted of testing of chemicals in the air, indoor air, as well as dust samples in 114 homes and 2 schools in the affected communities. So next slide. Now we're going to get into data related to chemical constituents and substances in the well control materials. So one of the main pieces of information that I want to point out here and that people should refer to is the OEHA report that was published in 2018 on potential chemical hazards associated with well SS25, the well control materials at the natural gas storage facility. So this report provides information on the amounts and constituents of each of the well control products used during each of the well control attempts. We also have the material safety data sheets, and what a material safety data sheet is essentially a standard document that outlines a product's chemical composition, safety measures, potential toxicological circumstances if you were to be exposed at various different levels to that product. So I'll move on to the next slide.
I just want to do a quick time check with you.
Almost there. A few more slides. I'll try to go a little quicker. So the next slide is more data related to the chemical constituents and substances in the well control materials. So sampling, there was sample collection and testing by multiple entities during and following the blowout within the facility. And this included sampling from waste bins containing materials released from the well during the blowout and used during the well control operations. So this includes laboratory reports of captured well control fluid samples tested for various chemicals and constituents. There was already a little bit of discussion today about 31 bins of volatile organic compounds, soils that had been contaminated with volatile organic compounds. So I would like the group to know that we do have volatile organic compound monitoring logs during the excavation of those soils from and near SS25. We also have the waste characterization laboratory reports and samples of the samples collected from those 31 bins of volatile organic compound contaminated soils. And we have those samples were tested for a variety of different chemical constituents, including volatile organic compounds, metals, total petroleum hydrocarbons, among others. And we also have, as was discussed and mentioned a little earlier, the waste manifests of those 31 bins. So in addition to that, I'll just provide one more example. We also have the description of the contents of the 150 bins, in addition to samples collected from those 150 bins and tested for waste characterization purposes. Public Health also had a contractor go up and collect samples from those 150 bins and test those samples for a wide array of oil and gas chemicals. In addition to that, we also have samples currently on hold from those bins that could be used by the health study researchers if they determine that they would like to perform additional testing on those samples as part of the research. Next slide. So next category here is chemical constituents and investigations of the oily residue that were noticed in the surrounding communities following the blowout.
Next slide, correct?
Yes, next slide. Thank you. So there were oily residue investigations and residential sample collection and testing of exterior home cleaning within the surrounding communities. So the data that we have in relation to the oily residue includes the exterior home cleaning database from the Southern California Gas Company, which includes information on the addresses and dates for which homes were cleaned and the level of observed residue during those cleanings. We also have the residue samples collected from residences' cars, pools, and homes. So samples were tested for various compounds, including total petroleum hydrocarbons and VOCs, including BTACs. And then we also have residue samples collected from a nearby park in the community, which were tested for, again, a variety of different chemical constituents. Next slide. So other relevant secondary data sources related to potential exposures, in addition to what I've discussed already today, the researchers may identify and will likely identify many other relevant data sources related to potential exposures. So this may include some very good resources, including the South Coast Air Quality Management District. I'm not sure why the screen is, I don't know if you're seeing this, but there's red writing on the screen. Maybe we can fix that. Thank you. So this includes the Multiple Air Toxics Exposure Study, also known as MATES, which quantifies the magnitude of population exposure risk from existing sources of selected air toxic contaminants. Another good resource is the California Geologic Energy Management Division, or CalGEM, their well statewide tracking and reporting system. And in addition to that, another really good source of data includes the California Environmental Reporting System submittals. So all regulated businesses are required by law to report and submit required information, including facility data on hazardous materials, regulatory activities, and chemical inventories, underground and above ground storage tanks, and hazardous waste generation on an annual basis or more regularly. Next slide. So now I'll get into secondary data and information on related to potential health outcomes from the Aliso Canyon blowout and facility operations. Next slide. So there's many sources of data, secondary sources of data on potential health and quality of life impacts of the Aliso Canyon disaster and storage facility operations. And I've just listed a few examples below. So these include health system symptom reports and household surveys that were collected by public health during and following the Aliso Canyon disaster. And then also population health data, including the Los Angeles County Health Survey, the California Health Interview Survey, and the Maternal and Infant Health Assessment, among others. There is surveillance data that could be used, and this includes the cancer surveillance data from the USC Cancer Surveillance Program, the California Birth Defects Monitoring Program, and the California Pregnancy Mortality Surveillance System, among others. This also includes electronic medical records data, laboratory records, hospital discharge data, emergency department visits data, among others, and vital statistics data. So this is just a very quick overview of the many different sources of data that could potentially be used by the researchers related to health outcomes in the impacted communities. And again, this is secondary data sources, so data that already exists.
Thanks, Kristen. We definitely do want to give a little bit more time for Q&A. So are you just about done?
Last slide. All right. So just to sum up, there is a wealth of secondary data that does exist that the researchers may decide to use for their proposed research. The Scientific Oversight Committee does feel that a wealth of data exists and that this information could support a robust health study that meets the community-informed goals and priorities. So again, I just want to reiterate that the health study researchers may identify other existing data or collect data themselves that is conducive and specific to their research proposal and the methods that they choose to meet the health study goals and priorities. So with that, I will leave it or give it back to you, Susan, for any questions.
Thanks, Chris. So that was definitely the most thorough description of the data that is available, I think, that we've had so far. So thank you for that. A lot of information, a lot of technical information trying to be digested. So definitely want to open it up for some questions. We're a little behind schedule, quite a bit behind schedule, but I want to allow for some questions here as well. So if any CAG members would like to raise a hand to ask a question or make a comment, just keep it as brief as you can so we can get through a few of them if possible. Not seeing any hands. I'll wait another second, see if I see any waving faces or live hands. I see Craig. Craig and Brian.
That was an overwhelming amount of information. Most of it was not really new. So I do have several questions. First of all, was there any heavy metals radiation measurements? And the composition of the oily mists that was found in our neighborhoods, kids' toys, pools?
Okay. Or did you want to ask a couple of your questions at once, Craig, and then we can respond?
Yeah, if you want me to. So,
how about we just do 3 questions right now? If you can do 3, and then we'll keep track of those.
Okay, so I'm asking, question 1, were the following materials, and do we have measurements for heavy metals, radiation, and the composition of the oily mist that was in our homes? The well kill materials that is published by OEA. My understanding is that that is an estimate of what is typically used for well kill, not the actual well kill materials that were used at SS25, 7 of them. So I'd like to verify that if that was estimates of what is typically used or actual samples of the materials used. And who did the well kill lab reports and who hired them? So that's a combination of that. That's question 2. And then question 3, I need more clarity on what details you have on the 31 missing bins. You got those 3?
Yeah. So you asked about heavy metals, radiation, oily mist, well kill materials, who hired, and then 31 bins. So in terms of heavy metals, we do have a lot of data. I'm not sure if you're referring to maybe some of the air monitoring data that we've done, or maybe some of the data that was collected in terms of the well control fluids and soil samples that were taken around the facility. But I do know kind of more specifically related to the well control materials and samples taken from the soils from the 31 bins, they were tested for metals, an extensive amount of metals, including heavy metals. In terms of the radiation, those same samples that were collected from the 150 bins were also tested for radioisotopes. In addition to that, we had our radiation management team go up to the facility and monitor for radiation within those bins. And all of that information has been published on our health study website and is available up there. I believe Jeff Day is here with us today if you have any questions about that. In terms of the oily mist.
No, I'm sorry, Christina, radiation in the community, right? Because we knew that measurements were made at the site, but radiation in the community, please.
So for radiation in the community, I'm not aware. I would have to go back through our records to see if there has been anything conducted or if any other regulatory agencies have conducted radiation within the community in the past. But we have heard your request for that, and we are taking that into consideration because the radiation isotope or the radioisotope testing and the radiation monitoring that was conducted already do not show any results that pose immediate risk to residents in the communities. We have reached out to the Cal EPA for a little bit of a guidance there on what they suggest in terms of next steps and if any next steps need to be taken in terms of radiation monitoring or radioisotope testing in the community. So once we hear back from them on that, we will give you guys all an update on that.
It's been a really long time on that one.
So in terms of the oily mist question, we do have the laboratory reports on the oily mist. Go back to that slide. Maybe, oh, you stopped sharing the screen.
So if we could, I mean, Christine, if we could try to answer questions, I know you can't necessarily answer them fully, but we can continue to document questions and provide answers after the meeting as well, more detailed level of answers.
Sure, yeah. Maybe just I'll touch on the 31 bins quickly, since that is kind of a more higher interest item for the group. So I did mention this already in the presentation, but to just reiterate, we do have the volatile organic chemical monitoring logs that were taken during the excavation of the soil. So as per SCAQMD Rule 1166, which has been shared with you previously via email, there's specific procedures that anyone has to follow when they are excavating soils that are contaminated. So they use these specific measuring devices. So we have the logs from that. We also have waste characterization laboratory reports of the materials or the soils that were within those bins. And then we also have the waste manifests, as previously stated by Chief Flores, and that have been shared with you already.
So Craig, if you'd like, Brian, if you'd like to ask the question.
I'll pass to Brian, but there are more questions that need to be answered.
Brian, go ahead.
I can wait, Craig, if you'd like, but.
Oh, this is something new about the VOCs of the 31 bins. And I'm curious why that wasn't passed on to us if you say you have it. VOC monitoring and the soil samples of what was put in the bin. And then finally, has there been any subpoena exercise to get this information from the vendor that was doing the excavation for SoCalGas?
Okay, so the first question, if I heard correctly, is why wasn't this shared earlier? So it actually, yeah, so it should be reflected in that technical report that is already up on the Aliso Canyon website. And then in addition to that, your second question is the subpoena. So no subpoena was used to acquire this information. It was simply provided.
So we do have one more item. I know we want to get to the budget item as well. So if I could have Brian ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I appreciate very much the fact that there is a dissertation of a various amount of information that was not provided previously. I am very concerned that that data was not provided over the last 6 years. Much of it is older than this year. And that is a very concerning point that I have to make clear. However, what I'm interested in is, of all the data that you just alluded to, and the various different departments and various different research, is that all available in one area? Can we get copies of that information? And does that information have detailed information? Everything that you just rattled off is very generic, very general. And I do appreciate that we have a short meeting. We can't go into a lot of detail, and I'm not expecting that. But I would like to know that everything that you have just presented is available for us to review in detail, to identify the level of detail that actually exists in that. And I would like to have an answer as to why this information was not presented over the last 20 months, because it should have been presented right in the beginning.
Okay, so I've heard two questions. One was about the data not being, I guess, reviewed in this manner previously or earlier. And then the second question was, is all of this information, so three parts, is all of this information one area? can we receive copies of it, and where can we find the information in more detail? So to address your first question, all of this information we have been incorporating into the data summary, which has been going through different versions throughout the past 2 years. That has been shared with you on multiple occasions, and we have tried to communicate the vast amount of information available during prior meetings. It's just something that's very hard to communicate. It is very technical, and kind of distilling it down in a way that is readily understood into understandable categories is difficult, and that's what we've been trying to do. So I'm sorry if this wasn't made more clear earlier. Your second question was 3 parts. So is all of this in one area? So when we first started, and we were telling you we're trying to compile information, what we were trying to do is that all of this data is in so many different locations. It's been collected by so many different entities. And what we're trying to do is get a good understanding of everything that does exist and where publicly available, for example, on websites, on the SEA QMD website, on the Los Angeles Unified School District website. We're trying to identify where it exists and compile that all into one area. And one way that we've been doing that is reflecting it in our technical summary, which is available on the Health Study Research website already. In terms of more detail, that technical summary is more detailed. So if you want to take a look at that, and if you have any questions or want further detail into any of the items reflected on there, you're welcome to reach out to us and ask for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I would like to just take a note of the time and wonder if it would be appropriate to take some public comment right now and then share the budget summary after that, just to allow a couple of comments from the public. Or I don't know, Dr. Davis, I will look to you to make that call for me. Or if we just want to jump into the budget and then just shorten our public comment period.
I think the CAG will stay at 5-10 minutes extra. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I think if we can do the budget presentation, it would be great. I do still want to get to public comment though.
Yeah, we'll just shorten public comment a little bit. Apologies, but we are taking note of what's been put into the chat as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Charlene, who will be sharing some slides and presenting information on the budget.
Susan, are you sharing the slide? Sure. Great. While she sets that up, there you go. Well, hello, good evening. My name is Charlene Contreras, and I'm going to review the expenditures that have taken place over the last 3 years. But first, I wanted to begin this part of the presentation by kind of explaining these expenditure categories that you'll see over the next few slides. The first category on top says community outreach and engagement. And this first category, as it states, it talks about our community engagement activities. It includes work that we did to provide information to the community, any kind of meeting facilitation, and general project support. The second category is the Scientific Oversight Committee coordination. And in this category, we're looking at activities that were mandated by the settlement, including the development of the SOC, development of the request for proposals, any kind of stakeholder communication regarding the SOC, regarding the request for proposals, and any kind of specific operational support for the development of this RFP. The third category right here that talks about formative research, that category includes the technical work that contributes to the availability of the data. Some of the things that Christina just went through in her last in this last presentation. This fourth category is contractor administrative costs, And that is just a category. We didn't know where to put anything else. And so it was really just administrative costs that came with the work with contracting. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. This right here, this slide, I just wanted to kind of talk about over the past 3 years. You'll see that the percentage of expenditures in the specific categories varied, and that depended on the stage of the project. So at quick glance, you can see the variation. I'm going to go into the next couple slides. We'll go in year by year so you can see some of the detail. Go ahead. Okay, so this was the first year. And what I wanted to bring to your attention, this is largely staffing up and planning. The fiscal year for public health runs July to June. And so this first year, we received the money from the settlement in March of 2019. So very late in the fiscal year. But these expenditures, as you can see, the $268,067, those were largely on staffing up and planning what community engagement was going to look like, as well as consulting with technical experts and project managing, trying to find SharePoints and just building the program. If you can, think about starting a company, it's really the first startup. I just wanted to note, to bring to your attention that we do have the settlement in an interest-bearing account. And so you'll see the second line right here, which is $59,915. We are using the interest to offset the costs associated with the development and administration of this health study. And so I just wanted to bring those to your attention. And so this year, in the first year where we received the $25 million, we did spend $268,067. So the budget carryover for the next fiscal year was $24,791,848. If you want to go to the next slide, we'll take it from there. So utilizing that money, the second year was focused really on laying the groundwork for the health study. It included the development of the SOC mandated by the settlement and the CAG, which was not mandated by the settlement, but DPH did want to make sure that the health study was developed with community input. Some of the SOC development activities included outreach, an application process, onboarding, and engagement. In this, I wanted to just also note that DPH has been providing in-kind support in the development and monitoring of the health study that's not reflected in this expenditure. These activities include the executive management, accounting, payroll, things like contracts and grant monitoring, and any of the legal services. Public health is picking up those costs. And so looking at this fiscal year that we talked about, coming in onto this year's budget was $24,791,848. And this year, that year, we spent $798,662 with a budget carryover of $24,455,498. And that interest accrued just brings, again, the interest is accruing. It continues to accrue. Next slide, please. So this last final year that just happened, this is the third year where it shifted really to increase, as you can see, the SOC coordination, and we focused really on gearing up to release the request for proposals. Some of the specific activities here was the community opinion surveys and the environmental sampling that took place to gather more information that's going to help this study research. And you can see, bringing in this year, the budget starting at $24,455,498. Our total expenditure for that year, last year, was $941,638, leaving us with a budget carryover of $23,658,715. Go to the last one. And so right here, this slide, I just wanted to show the combination of the three-year pie chart, so to speak. And so you'll see the total expenditures over the 3 years was $2,008,367. And so total interest accrued so far is $667,082. And so the budget carryover now, or at the end of that fiscal year, was $23,658,715. $715,000. Some of the initial 25 million needed to be utilized in advance of selecting the research team to administer and support the development of the study. But like we said, the interest-bearing account is helping to offset those costs. And some of those things, just once again, that were funded was the community engagement portion, engaging with the CAG, some of the additional environmental sampling that Chris had gone over, establishing and facilitating the SOC, and then finally preparing for the release of the RFP. I think that's the last slide on the budget. If there's any questions, or we wanted to go to general comment.
Thanks, Charlene. So we're going to take a couple of CAG questions, and definitely still would like to get some public comment in. So we're hoping to have a hard close at 7:45. There's some folks that do have some other obligations. So go ahead, Brian, or you had your hand up, and then Craig.
Yes, thank you. So what I've just seen is that you spent $1 million on community engagement. I am assuming that and it's a terrible thing to do to assume, I'm assuming that includes payroll. And first question, I don't have too many, but first question is, are you charging the health study, the personnel costs that are employed by DPH to the health study? And if so, the question is why? And then the other issue is there a detail of the expenses? Because $2 million for what you just alluded to seems like it seems like a lot of money. I mean, I can't imagine that based on the CAG's interaction with DPH that there was more than $2,000 spent with the CAG. There was no expenditures that the CAG knows of other than some meals when we were physically meeting, and since we weren't physically meeting, there is no cost other than maybe $100 for a Zoom account. So I'm very concerned about the expenditures that have been incurred, and I would like to see the details on that as to who got what. Because I think this is public money. It's not DPH money. It's not the state's money. It's not the city's money. It's not the county's money. It is the people's money. And I would like to see the details.
Jump in and let Charlene answer that first part of your question there.
Sure. And so the first part of your question, public health did provide significant in-kind services, and we're diligently managing the expenditures. So as I had talked about, the amount of money, and those slides can be posted onto the website. So you can see it does outline the amount that DPH did provide in kind. A portion of some, of the funds were used to support the development of the program. And those are necessary, as you can imagine. The health study can't start itself. And so, to answer your question, some very minimal funds were provided or utilized for DPH staff. The majority are contract staff that you've seen that have supported the CAG meetings, that have supported ENC meetings, that have supported a lot of the outreach and supported the broader community opinion surveys. And so, like I said, those slides are going to be available for you to digest a little bit more as you want on the website.
Well, I think it's imperative that details be provided to the public because, we as the CAG have been involved in this, and we know that as of the start of COVID, much of the DPH staff was utilized there. But I don't understand why DPH would use any of the health study money for salaries of people who were already employed and had jobs. Any business, any organization, they have multiple projects that come up from time to time. And while they may analyze where they're spending it, it is not automatically spent on special projects that are funded by somebody else. And I am very concerned as to how this money was spent. And $2 million spent deserves to be explained in detail. Thank you.
just keep it going if that's okay with everybody. Susan, I'm not sure where she is. I couldn't agree with Brian anymore. We need absolute detail on how $2 million was spent because I can't see it. I don't see those efforts done. That's all I'm going to say. We need the detail because I know Issam's had his hand up, and Julie Kornstein also has a question, but she's unable to find the raised hand question. So details, please, Charlene. Go ahead, Mary, and then we'll go Issam if that works for everybody.
As a CAG member, and there are quite a few on this call, this Zoom call, that was very involved in the community outreach and actually did much of it, as well as other members of this themselves. I certainly would like to see more detail about community outreach because for Department of Public Health to publicly say that they did an enormous amount of community outreach is really misrepresenting. We have said it over and over and over again. Everybody on CAG knows this. Much of the community does. There was not a good effort at community outreach. There was enough of an effort to put together some sort of study, but there was not a significant effort on community outreach. And a large portion of this money was spent on that. And I, as a CAG, did not see it over 2 years, a CAG member. And I understand these studies. I know that there has to be money spent on costs on how to get it done. But $2 million out of $25 million, that's not a health study, is such a disservice to the community that was harmed.
Thank you, Mary. And just to reiterate, the $2 million was not spent wholly on community engagement. That's why the other the categories I had mentioned were there so that you can see in each category how much was spent. Some money was spent on development of the SOC, which was mandated by the study, and some of the money was developed on formative research or was paid on formative research for, to compile a lot of the data, to take some samples. And so if you look at some of those categories, you'll see that it's not all on community engagement. A large portion is because a health study, as you have said, should be community informed. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And like I said, I know I went through those slides fast, but they'll be posted so you can take your time and look through.
Great. Thank you, Charlene, and thank you, CAG members, for your comments and your questions. All are being documented and noted. I do want to move us into public comment, and Issam has been very patient, and I did communicate with him earlier, Craig, so just know that I wasn't just pushing him off, so he was willing to wait for public comment. But we have Issam, and then Julie is in line to speak, so if you could limit your comments to 60 to 90 seconds, that would be great to make sure we get a couple others in as well. So go ahead, Issam.
I will do my best, but I may not be able to, so you can cut me off when the time comes. On the budget, I just want to make a quick comment. What is missing in the discussion, I'm not going to dispute where this money has been spent and where, but it's important to state a budget. What is the budget for the management and how is that being tracked as opposed to just tracking total number? Having a budget to track against would be important for each element. But I want to say something else. I was listening to the first part of the discussion. I am the first to acknowledge that DPH and LA County have done some great things for the community during this disaster. The most important one was the ordered SoCalGas to relocate anyone within 5 miles from the well if they wanted to relocate without questions asked. No one else stepped up to the community like that. Everyone else, like our esteemed city council and mayor, just did nothing but talk. The county filed a suit against the state in February 2017 to prevent the re-injection of gas into the field, and I do not forget that. It was Supervisor Barger that pushed for this health study and this settlement. Otherwise, it was going to be another AQMD settlement or another cow whatever settlement by the Air Resources Board. So I want to acknowledge that. But now I want to say something. I am coming off a very disappointing discussion with the PUC on the closure of Aliso Canyon, and it has shown me how frustrating the process is when a public member makes a comment or asks a question, and the only thing they get back is we will take it into consideration, that is an insult to an intelligent person. So I want to caution DPH that this health study process is being mishandled from that perspective. It is very annoying for the process to take a public comment and say, we're taking into consideration, and we come 3 months later, there's no answer to that question. We are adult boys and girls. Give us an answer. If the community is asking for a clinically based study, I heard all the discussion without an answer. If the SOC believes that a clinically based study is appropriate, let the SOC tell the CAG and the Communities Act. If the SOC believes it's not appropriate, just say no. But we can take a no, but you got to give people an answer.
Thank you. And if you want to get back in line, I'm happy to entertain another comment too. So I want to make sure you get to G. Okay. Go ahead,
I'm sorry. Hang on one second. So Isam, I really do appreciate your comments. And we have not, and I don't think that the SOC has, and this is really sitting with them, ruled out that, a clinical evaluation or a clinical study can't happen. I do want to remind people that the SOC is advising in terms of this study. We are administering in terms of putting out the funds, and we're doing the competitive process. By the settlement agreement, this is done by third-party researchers. Third-party researchers can look at those health outcomes and figure out what's the best way for this to be studied. So I don't think that they've ruled it out as far as I know, but it hasn't done exactly what has been mentioned in terms of the 412 letters or however many there were,
but
saying, stipulated as such.
Dr. Davis, the SOC is advising the research. There's nothing wrong. Nothing violates the RFP process. It will not be jeopardized if the SOC replied to this request and provided the community with an answer of a yes or a no, that they will or will not advance the idea of a clinically based study. There's nothing wrong with providing that assurance. To tell me that they're considering it leaves everybody with a hollow answer. We need some material answers. And all I heard today is an explanation of what a health study is.
Thank you. If I could just go to Julie and then Dr. Nardella, and we can certainly come back to this as well, Isam. I just want to make sure we hear from Julie and Dr. Nardella. So Julie, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you.
I will wait.
You can hear me? You hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Julie.
Thank you. There's no way to raise a hand, by the way, in the participants, and that's why I asked Craig what to do. All right. Interestingly, because this is really the first time that I've seen the actual chemicals that were involved after all these years. And of course, and I'm reading my notes because there was a lot of information. It mentions VOCs, volatile organic compounds, but kind of keeps going. If people don't know what that means, that really doesn't help a lot. Then there were the initials BTEX capitalized. I just looked it up because I don't know what BTEX, I'm not a scientist. And that's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Also, it mentioned the hexavalent chromium. These are highly carcinogenic chemicals. I was trying to remember the movie, was it Aaron Brockovich? And was that the hexavalent chromium that got into the water and people all came down with cancer? What does any of this get into our water supply? Does it drain down the hill? Does it get into, I have no clue. And I'm just astounded because there were so many different scientific terms, but nothing is really explained. But everything that I mentioned, that they are cancerous compounds. Can anyone give me any further information? Are you there? Oh, okay.
Sorry, Julie. Let me have Dr. Nardella make his comment and we'll then address your comment.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Nardella, you have the floor. 90 seconds.
Yeah, so it's a question, and it's to Dr. Davis. You've obviously had experience in doing studies, and you've probably read numerous studies. I just ask you where your scientific logic is. if you are doing this, which just was proposed to us on all of these levels, and think all of these levels are accurate, I think it would be one issue that you might be able to walk away with maybe a health risk assessment. You have no information or data in regards to toxic crude oil. The toxic crude oil was admitted that it sprayed this community for 4.5 months. What are the constituents of that toxic crude oil? It's not all the same. What is the benzene levels in it? What is the particulate matter that was exposed to this community? We don't know that. No evaluation. And the last is I want to know, as a second part of the question, why is it that DPH responded to acrolein levels that were 5 times Cal EPA levels, okay, in the schools, elementary schools? Why was it responded to not as it's okay and within normal limits because it's below Cal EPA, but no, we received a 2007 article that did not apply to anything. And just for the people listening in, if you do a little research on acrolein, it was used in World War I as a weapon of chemical warfare. And it's also, if you further look at it, it's most likely the causation of all your migraine headaches through a chemical, and I don't know if you're aware of this, it's the calcitonin gene-related peptide, and those are the ones that induce these headaches. And this is
So you're at 2 minutes right now, Dr. Nadella, if you could wrap up your comment.
Well, it's a question, it's not a comment. So I'd like to hear some answers, except for the fact that I'll look into it.
So thank you for your comments and your questions. Julie, in response to your request for additional information, the team is looking at different ways to present that information in a more understandable fashion. It may include a glossary or something of that sort as well, but to give that to you in a more digestible fashion, because you're right, it's a lot of information. I want to recognize the time. We're a couple of minutes past our hard stop there at 7:45. I would like to give Dr. Davis sort of the last word or closing comments, if you will, just in the last minute. And then we will be following up with notes of this meeting, the copies of the slides, and you will see your questions as well in the notes that will be coming out as well. So Dr. Davis, if you would like to just close us out.
Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's time and questions. Dr. Nadella, I'm not a toxicologist, and this is why that there's a scientific oversight committee advising on the study. So this is in their hands in terms of looking at what's there, looking at all of the community comments that have come in relationship to this, and then up to the researchers who want to apply for the research to talk about how they want to do it. So clinical evaluations, I believe, could be a part of that. It just depends on the researcher and what they propose as a part of that. But I don't know, but I haven't heard that anything has been ruled out in terms of the types of studies that could be done in this process. I do want to acknowledge everybody's frustration. You guys aren't the only ones that are frustrated, in terms of trying to get to a place where we have something out and actually know what the research is exactly going to be. We have gathered, this input in terms of getting the community's priorities in terms of what specific health outcomes or whether there are environmental concerns, that may be there. And we are, putting our trust in the scientific community to look at that, understand the incident, and then propose how best to answer those questions so that the question that was highlighted by Craig earlier in terms of risk, cancer, and all of that, is more formally evaluated as best as can be possible, given everything that's there. So I do want to thank the CAG, and the broader community. You all have been instrumental and added some things to what has happened throughout this process, that have been great things to add in this. And this has really been, again, in the formative stages of trying to get, requests for proposals out there for, again, as the settlement agreement stipulates, that the third-party researchers actually do. And I also want to say, again, that many great ideas have been brought forward, and those have been, shared and given to the SOC. And again, as we've talked about, it will be reflected, throughout the RFP. And that said, where possible, we hope at least some of the information has given you some additional information you didn't know, but that it was sitting there and existed. And we hope that it provides some clarification on and address some questions, but I recognize that it doesn't address all. There's a lot of questions in terms of detail related to the budget. And really it's, $2 million is there as a total expenditure, but it's offset by almost 700,000 in interest. So it's really about 1.3 million. But in either case, we continue to work towards trying to get evaluation in terms of those health outcomes. That's what the RFP and the goals and priorities, is identifying. As we go into this period of finalizing that and getting that RFP out there, as I mentioned before, this last Monday, we won't be hosting CAG meetings or community meetings during the RFP solicitation process. We will come back as soon as, the RFP will be out. You all will have a chance to see what's there. Researchers will have a chance to apply. And then we'll go through that review process and according to what is required in terms of county policy. And that's what we have to hold to. So once the contract is awarded to a research team, we'll definitely provide an update. And based on how the research, will be conducted, we'll reevaluate, how we re-engage with the community. And there could be some pieces inside the research that actually engages the community. I don't know. Again, this is what researchers will be proposing, as they submit their proposals once the RFP is out. I think and even though it hasn't been said, I think there is agreement around at least the health outcomes that people are most concerned about. And those have been prioritized, inside of that goals and priorities document. And that is what is going to be the heart of, at least in
Thank you,
terms of
Dr.
what
Davis.
researchers will be looking at.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us a little bit longer tonight and for rescheduling in order to make tonight's continuation. Just a reminder that next week we do have the continuation of the meeting as well, to specifically focused on the cancer study and the complete blood count analysis. So we hope that you can join us again next week, next Thursday, and you'll see the email or the agenda posted on that one as well. So thank you, everybody.
Had your chance.
Recording stopped.